Hey everyone, we're here today on Country Pocket with Roger Street Friedman. His new album is Love, Hope, Trust, and he is the rare Long Island native that I have on this show. Roger, how you doing?
Doing great, Trevor. Thanks for having me.
We just heard the title track, so I'm gonna divide this title track conversation into two sections. Later on, we'll talk about the sort of societal benefits to love, hope, and trust. But first up, what are the personal benefits to love, hope, and trust?
Well, I mean, I think we've all, we've been through a lot. I mean, I think every period in history has been fraught with all kinds of upheaval and peril. Um, but I think especially, as we all know, going through the last 3 years at least, and maybe the last 7 or 8 years, it's been especially tough with the pandemic and the resulting upheaval in supply chains and how it's upended all of our lives. um, and I think add to that the divisive nature of social media and the pervasive how it's pervaded every aspect of our lives, and it's a recipe for disaster really if we're not careful. And so I really feel like a lot of the times when I write a song, it's I I, I consider them to be notes to myself on uh, on how to live. And so I had gotten, like anybody else, I can get sucked into um, the political arguments on Facebook, and I just came to realize that it wasn't serving me or anyone else to do that, and that really the way to approach life is to try and get back to a place where we can understand that we're more alike than we are different, um, especially in this. The fact is, we're all in America. We're all Americans, or aspiring to be Americans, and we should try and approach each other with that sense of brotherly and sisterly love, and rather than despair, hope, and rather than mistrust, trust. Trust that we all want, sort of the same things out of life, which is, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So,
And
what kind of benefits does society see if people start treating each other with love, hope, and trust?
well, I think that's a great question. I mean, it might seem obvious, but I think it's a more uh, accepting way to be in the world, accepting of each other's differences while celebrating the similarities, um, and maybe being a little bit more inquisitive, uh, instead of judgmental about each other's points of view. We might come to a greater understanding by, I always say uh, the solutions to problems, or the way to understanding is really to get all perspectives, and so I think that would benefit society for sure, because if we would all get out of our little corners, our respective corners, and sort of meet in the middle, we each might learn something about the other.
Now, I sit there, I listen to your song, and I agree. Love, hope, and trust could totally make society better. But then I look up at reality and I see that the people on sort of the other side of the political aisle that I'm on are talking about overturning elections, installing dictatorships, you know, causing a default in the debt to get their way on stuff. And I don't know how I'm supposed to sit there and say, I trust you.
Well, it's very aspirational. you know I look at a mannequin in a window in a stylish outfit and it looks great, and I aspire to have the kind of a shape that would look great in that outfit, but I don't, you know. So it's uh it's definitely an aspirational idea. And the thing is, I think the voices we're hearing, and I think they're the most extreme voices. You know what I mean? I think it's not it's not how most people feel. So I mean, and that's, you know, that's a whole nother issue, which is how the news gets reported, you know, the quote unquote news, um, and how that frames everybody's understanding of a particular issue. You know, like just the election denialism, for instance. You know, those people really believe that because all of the information that they see, you know, supports that view. So how are they supposed to break out of that um, mindset when, first of all, they're predisposed to want that result? That was the result they wanted. Then they hear that the um, uh, you know, all the voices that that they trust saying the election was stolen. You know, they see you know, all evidence to the contrary. They see all this, you know, stuff about it. So part of it is, uh, you know, loving these people. You know, loving in a big, broad, general sense, and understanding what they're going through and what they're exposed to and why they feel this way. Um, you know, makes me hopeful that if I were, you know, across the table drinking a beer with somebody, you know, one of my friends who might be on that side of the aisle, that we could have a reasonable and rational discussion about, uh, hey, let's do a thought experiment. You know, there were 60 court cases that were all thrown out. You know, so maybe there's something there. You know, it's just it's, and I'm hopeful, really, that because you know, it always has to get, you have to hit the wall before you can, it's like, before you can turn anything around in your life. You know, they say, you know, an addict or an alcoholic, you know, you got to hit rock bottom.
Mhm.
um and I think the country kind of feels like we're close to that, and I think the midterms sort of proved that the majority of people don't want the extreme, and we really are all craving this bipartisan, you know, working together thing. um Unfortunately, you know, the extreme voices seem to scream the loudest and get the most attention. But I think, you know, I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful that in the long run, um, the rational middle ground will get the will own the day.
Yes, of the 3, I think hope is the easiest for me to have, and trust is probably the hardest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, it's hard, man. We're in a hard spot. I mean, like the song says, you know, I don't know where we're going, but wherever we're going, we need love, hope, and trust. And it's scary. It's scary because, you know, democracy hangs on a knife's edge, really, as we've seen. You know, I grew up my whole life believing that nothing like that could ever happen in this country. You know, our democracy was solid because of the checks and balances in our government, and yet it's so people are literally plotting to
Mhm.
take the vote away from the people. You know, to take the voice of the people out of the equation. So we got to be vigilant.
Well, speaking of some little flaws in our democracy, let's go to the next song called "The Ghosts of Sugarland." Why did you decide to spotlight that story?
Well, it's just it's such a compelling story, and the thing that was so, it was a fluke that I came across this. It was an article in NPR, or maybe it was a an online thing where I just found the story about um, this school that was being built on a piece of property in Texas that had once been a prison, and they found the remains of 95. They found a mass grave, essentially an unmarked mass grave, with the remains of 95 convict laborers. That didn't come out right away who they were, but they just, through a long process, um, they discovered these bodies, and or the remains of these bodies, and it was such an amazing metaphor for burying history. Like, it's a story that's never been told in school. So, and essentially, the story is that after the Civil War, the Southern plantation owners who had lost all of this free labor um, were really on the balls of their butts, and they needed a free labor, and they exploited the flaw in the 13th Amendment. The elites down in the South, they started creating these laws called the Black Codes, which made it very easy for them to arrest people, mostly black men, um, for charges like vagrancy. Vagrancy, I don't know if this is accurate, but I think it was a felony. So if you were just look if you and also, so if you were just looking for work, if you were an African American and you were looking for work in town, and you looked at somebody the wrong way, they would arrest you, and it was very easy for them to convict these people and send them to these prison farms. And Sugarland um, became known as the hellhole on the Brazos. Because many people who went there didn't live for more than like 2 months. So it was just such a compelling story with so much imagery, and I was so angry that I never learned about it in school. And then to think about what's going on now, where they're trying to not teach Black history in school, and because they don't want people to feel bad. It just seemed like the the time was right to tell this story of a big piece of history that was hidden away, and actually was not that long ago. It wasn't outlawed in Texas until 1912. Um, so it became a very potent story for me to want to tell, and I'm still, um, there's more to tell. I think there are more songs in there, coming on maybe the next album.
Uh, Speaking of the fact that the black codes might have been outlawed 100 or so years ago, but did you see that just this past year in Louisiana there was a vote about whether or not slave labor in prisons should remain legal, and that state, the last one in the nation, decided to keep it legal.
Yes, yes, and Angola prison down there is one of the most notorious. Um, Yeah, and so that's a great point. Just it's still reverberating throughout our society, right? Like, racism is not gone, and systemic racism is not gone, and the effects of these, uh, you know, convict leasing became very, very popular throughout the South. So I don't know if you know this, but they would the state would arrest these men, sometimes women, predominantly African American. There were some whites, but it was 90% African American men, and then they would lease them to the companies, or to the plantation owners. So the plantation owners who used to, when they owned slaves, would actually have to take care of them because they were considered an asset. They would have to treat them well and feed them and house them. This convict leasing system was even more brutal than slavery, because if somebody died, they would just say to the state, hey, this guy died, we need another guy, so there was no incentive to actually treat these men humanely. So and yeah, I mean, like you said, it's still going on. And even, I mean, there's still prison labor, throughout the country, even though I think they have to get paid something, but it's not certainly a lot. And the prison population is still majority African American, even though they represent a much smaller percentage of the overall population. So yeah, it's a topic with a lot of legs.
Absolutely. We're gonna be right back, but first we're gonna hear Ghost of Sugarland, and then we'll hear another one called Mother and Son.
Awesome.